Dear students, this presentation will be useful for you to prepare your future PowerPoints or presentations. Remember to pay attention because later you will have to answer some questions about this presentation. Also, remember to be careful in your future presentations about English mistakes. Good luck! A brief history of musicals. Musicals began to emerge as modern Western theatre in the 19th century. They are commonly shows that integrate a story with music, range from 30 minutes to 3 hours, and are presented in 2 acts. They originated in ancient Greece, where music and dance were included in light comedies and tragedies. The Romans continued this tradition, also introducing a form of tap shoe to make the dance steps more audible in auditoriums. By the Middle Ages, musicals mostly consisted of traveling minstrels. In the Renaissance period, musicals evolved into commedia dell'arte, Italian masked theatre based on sketches. Comic operas and ballet operas, like John Gay's The Beggar's Opera, became popular in the 18th century. Ballet operas typically contained lyrics which were written to popular tunes. Music halls, melodrama, burlesque, vaudeville, and operette also developed during the 18th century. Music halls were incredibly popular during the Industrial Revolution, and both Lauren and Charles Chaplin began their careers there. Operette was introduced by the French composer Hervé in 1850. The most significant composer of operette was Jacques Offenbach. Gilbert and Sullivan were the first authors in Britain to write musical stage works. They combined humor, acting, and music, and were similar to the musicals we love today. Pirates of Penzance and HMS Pinafore are two of the most famous works. Meanwhile, in America, Harrigan and Hart were doing their bit towards the evolution of modern musicals. Their plays were vaudeville sketches of lower-class workers which audiences, typically lower middle-class citizens, could relate to and loved. Vaudeville sketches and variety shows tended to consist of chorus girls, dancers, and comics. Minstrel shows were also introduced around this time. These now carry some racial stigma because white and black actors performed with black faces. Nevertheless, at the time they were popular. Broadway as we know it was introduced in 1866 with the show The Black Rook. In the 1900s, Cohan and Herbert gave musicals the distinctive style that we know today. Musicals evolved steadily throughout this period and the 20th century. Rodgers and Hammerstein's famous musical Showboat premiered in 1927 and Oklahoma in 1943. In the 1950s, iconic musicals such as The King and I, Bernstein and Sondheim's West Side Story, and My Fair Lady entered Broadway. Concept musicals emerged in the 1960s. They are typically musicals which put significance on the statement rather than the narrative. Cabaret is thought to be a concept musical. However, by the 1980s, the big stage musicals were becoming more fashionable and French musical Les Miserables, Miss Saigon and Andrew Lloyd Webber's Phantom of the Opera were introduced. At present, big Broadway musicals seem to be growing in popularity, with The Lion King, Wicked, and Billy Elliot being highly successful favorites.